Across the world, many people over the years have disappeared, seemingly into thin air, with no satisfying explanation. While some, like Harold Holt, disappeared into thin air never to be found again, others disappeared in the most mysterious of circumstances, only to reappear. Welcome to Bizarre Cases, and now we're exploring 3 cases where people disappeared but would reappear years later. From a girl who disappeared while she was out on a jog, to a student who had no idea of what happened to him in the 1 year of his disappearance. We have compiled 3 bizarre cases where people disappeared and then reappeared miraculously. Without further ado, let's walk out onto the edge of the unknown. Sherry Papini. In November 2016, Sherry Papini disappeared while out on a jog in Northern California. She was found 3 weeks later on a highway about 140 miles away, battered and bruised, and with a story about how she'd been abducted and tortured by 2 Hispanic women. But it was a lie. Born on June 11, 1982, Sherry Papini had a troubled youth. Papini allegedly burglarized her father's house when she was 18 years old. And a few years later, Papini's mother told the police that she believed that Papini was harming herself and trying to blame her for the wounds. On November 2, 2016, Sherry Papini went out for a jog. As People reports, her husband Keith came home to find that his wife was still gone. He realized something was wrong when he used the Find My iPhone app and found her phone discarded on the side of a road about a mile away. Keith Papini called the police, and a massive search for his wife began. 3 weeks later, the case took an alarming turn. Then, the missing mother was discovered near a highway about 140 miles away from her home. She was emaciated and her hair had been cut off, and she had multiple injuries, including bruises, a swollen nose, and a brand burned into her shoulder. According to Sherry Papini, she had been abducted at gunpoint and held by 2 Hispanic women. Papini claimed the women had kept her chained in a closet, tortured her, and burned a brand into her shoulder. Despite the bizarre narrative, police worked tirelessly to find the captors. But after 4 years, Sherry Papini's kidnapping story fell apart. But the case didn't truly break open until 2020. Then, DNA recovered from Sherry Papini's clothing was found to match her ex-boyfriend, James Reyes. ABC News reports that police spoke to Reyes, who said that Papini had told him she was being abused by her husband and asked for his help. Reyes did not know at the time that the abuse allegations were unfounded. Reyes explained that Sherry Papini had stayed at his house of her own free will for weeks, hundreds of miles away from where her friends and family were conducting a desperate search. Around Thanksgiving, he said that she'd missed her kids and wanted to go home, but first she wanted to injure herself, and she even asked Reyes to help her fake a few of her wounds. After Reyes passed a polygraph test, the police brought Sherry and Keith Papini in for questioning. They told them that the DNA on Sherry Papini's shirt belonged to Reyes, and then continued to blow apart the hoax. The reason why you lost so much weight is because you stopped eating, an investigator said, per the New York Post. The reason why you got a rash on your arm was because you cleaned his house. The reason why you had the brand is because he went to the store, got the branding tools, and branded you. The reason why your nose is broke is because of a hockey stick. Ultimately, Sherry Papini was sentenced to 18 months in prison for her deception. In addition, she was ordered to pay $309,902 in restitution to the California Victim Compensation Board, the Social Security Administration, the Shasta County Sheriff's Office, and the FBI, according to NBC News. In March 2022, Sherry Papini was arrested and charged with making false statements and mail fraud. She pleaded guilty that same year. Papini never offered a motive for her hoax. A psychiatrist later suggested that she might have been seeking fame and fortune, or perhaps trying to avoid a real-life problem, such as a divorce, by inventing a fake crisis. Though Sherry Papini was found out, her deceit shocked her loved ones, her community, and the entire nation. It proved that sometimes things aren't as they appear, and when a story seems off, there's often a reason why. Mateusz Kawecki, 30, was a Polish man from the small village of Hutkow in southeastern Poland. He'd been working as a construction worker in Hanover, Germany for about 5 years and lived with his father, who also worked there. On March 28, 2018, he left for Poland to see his pregnant fiancée, but he never arrived. 5 months later, his decapitated remains were discovered in a barn near his family's home, far from his girlfriend's home. His car has never been found. Matusz, what happened to him? Was it a strange case of suicide or murder? Matusz had a long-distance relationship with his Polish fiancée, who lived in the northwestern Polish village of Reappear. Matusz set out driving his 1998 BMW 525 from Hanover to Reappear on March 28, 2018 at around 11:30 p.m., a journey of 402 miles, because she was pregnant with his baby and close to giving birth. He was scheduled to arrive the following morning, March 29th, between 8 and 9 a.m. Matusz, on the other hand, never made it to Reappear. According to his father, he called Matusz around 10:30 a.m. on March 29 and was told that there were terrible traffic jams on the way to Poland and that he was stuck in Szczecin at the time. Szczecin is a town on the Polish-German border on the way to Reappear, and the distance from there to his destination was approximately 133 miles, or 214 kilometers. The German-Polish border was unmanned, and no passport checks were conducted, despite the presence of number plate recognition cameras. He also sent a text message to his fiancée around that time, stating that he will be with her in about 2 hours. After several unanswered calls to Matusz, his fiancée contacts Matusz's sister, Katarzyna Piotrkowicz, who also lives in Hanover, around 5 p.m., but she is unable to reach her. Matusz's mother goes to the police later that evening, but they advise her not to file a missing persons report because it is too early and Matusz will most likely turn up. However, by early April, the family has reported Matusz missing in both Germany and Poland. The German police refuse to conduct an investigation because they believe the Polish authorities are involved. Matusz's family then requests that the Polish police locate his cell phone, which was apparently turned on for a few days after his disappearance. But the police are unable to do so because Matusz was using a German SIM card. Matusz vanished in Poland, and German authorities are unable to locate his phone. The Polish police later claim that Matusz's phone was never connected to a Polish network, and it is unclear where Matusz received his father's call. Katarzyna Piotrkowicz said that investigators claimed that Matusz never crossed the border, as CCTV monitoring at the border crossing indicated he had not entered Poland. Frustrated with the efforts of the police investigation, Matusz's family began their own search for clues on the disappearance and checked the entire route, going into side streets, checking with gas station staff, asking for video surveillance, going around markets in towns near the border with Matusz's picture, and posting posters with his image. The family appears on TV in Poland and Germany several times, and complains that the police are not doing enough and not taking the matter seriously. On September 12, 2018, a neighbor comes to Matusz's mother's house in Hutko to ask them about their barn, as a terrible smell had been emanating from it since July, and they think it was probably a dead animal. The neighbor asks her if he can check the barn thoroughly. Half of the barn was walled off, creating a room, and there was an attic mezzanine level on the top of that room. She agreed, so the neighbor climbed up and saw a pile of clothing. Upon closer inspection, though, he was shocked to see that it was actually human remains, consisting of a severed head and a torso. The corpse is too decomposed to be identified. Further examination of the area showed that there were also 2 rope nooses hanging from the roof, and a backpack on the floor which was later established to belong to Matusz. Some of Matusz's teeth are knocked out and stuck to his clothing with what seems to be blood, and there were bloody patches on his clothing. Inside his backpack, there is a Polish water bottle with cigarette butts inside and an orange juice box. Matusz's family claimed that he never drank orange juice. A cell phone in the backpack showed that there was one call to his uncle on March 30th, 2018, but this seems like an accidental dial, as it only lasted for less than a second and never got through. DNA analysis was conducted and it was confirmed that the remains were indeed Matusz's. His personal belongings were analyzed and no other DNA had been found on his items. The police and public prosecutor maintained that the death was a suicide and refused to investigate further, despite appeals and efforts by the family. They believed that Matusz had planned his death beforehand and said that there was no evidence of foul play. Unfortunately, the exact pieces of evidence which led prosecutors to this conclusion weren't released to the public. 4 days after the body was found, Matusz's family found his shoe in the barn and his detached foot still inside it, which showed to the family that the police hadn't even bothered to search the barn properly. Prosecutors were able to gather a lot of evidence, including DNA, expert reports, and analysis of Matusz's phone. German police also obtained security camera footage and conducted a search of Matusz's apartment in Hanover. All of the evidence was then analyzed by experts in Warsaw. Based on all of the evidence, prosecutors were able to establish that Matusz had lied to his family on the day of his disappearance. He was not in Stettin when he'd called his family and also wasn't driving at the time. He was still in Germany according to receipts found with his belongings. He was intending to go to his fiance's place in the northwest, a 395-mile or 635-kilometer journey between the two. Matusz's car has never turned up despite a large search, neither in Poland nor in Germany. They were not able to find the car or evidence of it being transferred to a new owner or deregistered. The keys to the BMW were also not located, despite his wallet being found in the backpack in the barn. Stephen Kubacki. Unlike our previous two encounters, Stephen Kubacki's story is one of genuine mystery bordering on the supernatural, rather than a brutal case of imprisonment. On a February morning near Lake Michigan in 1978, student Stephen Kubacki would go skiing for several hours. However, when he did not return the next day, a massive search was launched. Footprints were discovered in an unusual and foreboding location near where the student claimed to be going. They even came to a halt right at the frozen water's edge. There were no marks on the frozen surface of the water, and there was no evidence that the ice had been broken anywhere. Stephen's skis and backpack were discovered later that day. However, no other evidence of Kubacki was discovered, and the search was eventually called off. While his family did not give up hope, they were prepared for the worst. Then, in early May 1979, Stephen Kubacki would appear out of nowhere on his parents' doorstep. He had no recollection of where he had been. He'd awoken earlier that day in a field in Pittsburgh, hundreds of miles from where he'd vanished, and about 40 miles or 64 kilometers from his family's home. Even stranger, he was dressed strangely and carrying a strange bag of maps that he didn't recognize. Rather than accepting the many offers from media outlets for his story, Kubacki would withdraw from public view, refusing to speak of the incident, of which he had no memory, and refusing to undergo such procedures as hypnotic regression because he didn't have any psychological problems and wanted to keep it that way.